Good
Good morning.
morning, Teresa.
Sorry, Johann Bach, but you're too dead to hear those mistakes. I had another dream. I was approaching a city park in some town. I heard children playing inside. There was a carved wooden fence like a mural, and it was around the park so that you had to pass its images. Some of them were limned by carving through or near through. The images represented violence against children, and the smells of cedar and oak passed through the cuts, lines, and holes where violence is represented as swords striking, bullets flying, bombs exploding, clubs smashing. But it's very peaceful, and the children are happy. But I see blood on the sidewalk.
So that's how you woke up this morning.
That's what I was dreaming this morning. Latest news, if you're an Ohio schoolgirl and you wish to play sports in high schools or college, you must, according to a new bill, be subject to a crotch check. Phelan Fairchild wrote a stunning rebuttal to Bill Maher's bullshit, complaining the whole world was turning gay. Projecting from the 20 or so percent of the youngest generation who say they are GLBTQ, Maher says there are more gay people than ever and implies it's some sort of social contagion. Excuse me. Fairchild retorts in part, quote, Maher joins the long list of individuals with a platform who are peddling the junk science of ROGD, or rapid onset gender dysphoria, a loosely threaded together theory with no factual basis that claims young people are catching transness from each other or claiming to be trans to fit into peer groups to seemingly justify the growth of the global trans community. This is largely rooted in their prejudice against people unlike them. It really boils down to why do trans people keep happening? They bemoan before their audiences how woke it is to accept our existence in society or to include us in any scale where we might be seen. The reality, as all transgender people already know, is not that there are more transgender people now than there were historically. We are simply more visible in everyday life, and perhaps that agitates narrower minds. There's a lot of people who resent that visibility. They resent that the world has changed significantly in the past 20 years. Fewer people are willing to distort their identity in order to conform to archaic rules, caustic opinions, and dangerous religious ideologies. There are resources today. There is more education and research to support those navigating the vast array of learning about oneself. There is a larger demographic of people unwilling to treat trans people with animus or cruel judgment. In more developed states and countries, younger people feel safer expressing their gender. As we lean away from religious extremism and those constructs that attempted to force us all into the same mold, people are now more likely to react with something other than paralyzing fear when they realize their gender is differently aligned, end quote.
End quote from,
Phelan Fairchild.
ah,
Phelan Fairchild.
you know, as a kid that grew up queer, I first realized I was queer when I was 11 years old. And it was terrifying, right? Because it was the late 70s. It was around the same time Anita Bryant was holding her crusades against people like me. And that was really the only place I'd ever heard that there were other people like me. Well, except for the rumors about that one uncle. Um, it was it was a terrifying time, and I felt very isolated. I felt very alone. And to that, uh, you know, growing up through the 80s, the 90s, seeing this social opening and taking great heart in the fact that it must hopefully be easier for kids today. Now we see this backlash happening again, especially targeting trans kids. And the idea that kids are choosing to be trans because it's trendy, because they've got a friend that's trans and so they want to be into, that is so much, how do we say, bullshit, because it's never an easy path to be queer. There is still a whole lot of homophobia out there, as much as I've spent most of my life working against this. It's really hard for me to imagine that we are back to some kind of, insane level of transphobia. Well, back to that it never really left. That there are girls in high school that are going to be subjected to pelvic exams because there are some state legislators that are a little obsessed, right? And who are insisting that we wipe out any of those new ideas, that opening of our society to accept people to be their authentic selves. That this is just so anathema that we become an accepting and tolerant society that they are going to subject high school girls to pelvic exams if they want to play sports, so that they can be sure that there's no sneaky trans kids running around.
And you notice the way they do it, they subject all the girls.
Yeah, no, that's
to,
girls are now subjected to pelvic exams if you want to play sports.
I think it says how they feel about girls' sports. They feel that girls shouldn't be playing sports. And I mean, if I know conservatives,
it's how they feel about girls.
Yeah,
that our bodies are not our own. That we get to subject ourselves to all manner of intrusive exams because, again, some guys are a little obsessed.
This rapid onset gender dysphoria, it doesn't exist, and it was created in the public mind by a British group who found a group of TERFs, of trans excluding radical feminists. And actually, I find that term overused. There are a lot of people who are just trans excluding, really don't understand feminism, women.
There's a bunch of trans hating people out there. Yeah.
And I hate hijacking feminism for this term, but there was an effort to poll that group and see what they would say about, did their children, were their children suddenly becoming transgender for no reason that they could discern, or, and the other one was, or are you being approached by trans women who insist that they are owed sex as a trans woman from a lesbian? Both of those polls were conducted with people who were small groups of people who are already ideologically predisposed to say absurd things about transgender women. And so these ideas, which have been amplified by formerly respectable institutions like, and particularly the UK Guardian, have had tremendous political effects. And you may hear those ideas and those words repeated, and they actually came from the UK Guardian. And it's not the first time that a small group of people has a tremendous effect in demonizing the trans community. In the 70s, it was somebody else, and now it's the Guardian, apparently. But I am ready to change subjects on that and talk about a different situation. Warfare seems to be changing. The Ukraine conflict seems to show that warfare is changing in ways that may or may not benefit the less well-heeled fighter. One of the big changes is standoff hypersonic munitions, like the ship-killing missiles that zigzag and dive down to the water level before punching through the hull with a 1,000-pound explosive. That is much cheaper than buying your own aircraft carrier. For years, there's been some question whether such munitions have ended the era of the aircraft carrier, that is. Can a brace of such missiles evade the uranium bullet streams and anti-missile missiles that an aircraft carrier group carries? If there's anything to war games, they can. The answer to that might mean whether or not in a war for Taiwan, thousands of U.S. soldiers are sent drowning to the bottom of the Taiwan Strait. Likewise, are loitering drones with melted liquid metal-injecting warheads the end of the armored personnel carrier and the tank? Certainly many Russian tank crews have met their end from the U.S.'s Phoenix tank killer drones, which operate in that manner. Here's what the Bulletin of the atomic scientist Dan Gittinger has to say about them, quote, "The effect that drones and loitering munitions have had on the conduct of military operations in recent armed conflicts remains contested. Still, these systems are providing state and non-state actors with a slate of advanced capabilities. In the war on Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan is believed to have used 4 types of loitering munitions acquired from 4 manufacturers in 2 countries. And speaking for myself, Azerbaijan pretty much wiped out all of Armenia's tanks with the buzzy little things and won the war, and that was rather unexpected. Returning to the text, increasingly, producers are offering families of loitering munition solutions, and by loitering, again, they just mean that they fly around in the sky till they find their target. Some of their targeting is robotic. If you're thinking Skynet, well, so am I. With individual aircraft designed to meet specific operating requirements, illicit transfers of loitering munitions from states such as Iran to non-state actors, and research and development partnerships like that announced last year between Israel Aerospace Industries and South Korea are also contributing to the sustained spread of these weapons. The ecosystem of armed drones has changed radically since the General Atomics Predator conducted its first missile launch just over 2 decades ago. Can you believe it's been 2 decades? Bomblet dropping quadrotors and lightweight precision munitions have contributed to the democratization and miniaturization of the armed drone. The emerging popularity of loitering munitions represents a further acceleration of those trends, creating new challenges for those who wish to manage drone proliferation, end quote. Now, speaking for myself, this sort of speculation only increases when one considers that Ukraine sunk Russia's equivalent of a U.S. aircraft carrier in prestige and armament, a ship that was surrounded by other ships in the way that a U.S. aircraft carrier is, specifically the battleship Moskva. Was done with a couple of outdated technology, shore-to-ship missiles, and a Switchblade drone used as a decoy. To pin down, but it might be either that U.S. and or that U.S. evangelicals might not be able to race war with irrigated U.S. weaponry. The era of the tank and battleship and the aircraft carrier may be over. Now, speaking about a different kind of warfare, that against the environment and against democratic freedoms, it took a massive Chevron bribe of an Ecuadorian judge, a judge who had to be trained and rehearsed. Entirely concocted testimony and gross abrogation of the standards of the court, but Chevron Incorporated managed to find a judge corrupt enough to break legal precedent and hire a Chevron-connected law firm to prosecute attorney Steven Donziger. Steven's crime was proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Chevron, as a legal owner and successor of Texaco, had utterly wrecked miles and miles of pristine rainforest in Ecuador, coated with billions of barrels of contaminants and crude oil, creating a killing disaster, a vast no man's land where there was a pristine forest. No man's land that made the Exxon Valdez and the Deepwater Horizon disasters look like driveway stains. Steven Donziger proved it was so, and Ecuador's high court penalized Chevron for a mere $9.5 billion. And I say a mere 9.5 because they did a lot more damage than that. For this heinous act of truth-telling and justice-bringing, Donziger spent years in prison and then was shackled to an ankle monitor, unable to leave his home. The excuse, not that it matters, was that as a lawyer, he would not expose his client's private communications. Every effort was made to catch Donziger out of his cage, even phone calls at 4 a.m. in which he had to answer sharp and detailed questions to his whereabouts and activities. And now our heroes at Chevron are trying to get Steve Donziger disbarred in the District of Columbia. He is already disbarred in New York and cannot ply his trade there, thanks to Chevron. And they want his fate to strike terror in the hearts of activists, attorneys, and journalists forevermore, lest all of the rich suffer further challenges. And speaking of outrageous and deadly abuse of truth tellers, WikiLeaks' Julian Assange, who it turns out surprised is not a rapist, but a journalist with Chelsea Manning exposed the mindless brutality of the Iraq War, notably the stunning videotape of a helicopter gunner howling with bloodlust as he murdered an unarmed journalist and his friends and family from the air, is scheduled to be dragged out, I think, in about 2 days, out of the notorious Belmarsh dungeon in Britain, exposed to Britain's notorious Judge Patel, and chained to unless Patel suddenly changes his mind, he'll be chained to a railing on a stinking prisoner transport jet to be thrust into one of the USA's maximum security hellholes, there to die without the sight of the sun again in his life. So remember, oh my fellow denizens and citizens of the land of the free, to lick those corporate and military boots clean with a smile on your face and never question the actions and intentions of the mighty. Thus endeth the sermon. Do you have things to say that?
Oh, yes, I do, in fact. Well, that have to do with the violence in our society in general. And it will never escape me that we have a society that condemns violence on the one hand and commits it with great aplomb on the other. It will never stop striking me that in 1999, there was a day where I think it was the Columbian, I was in Vancouver at the time, the Columbian or the Oregonian, it was one of the two daily papers that, back when we still had daily papers, commonly found, that had the Columbine murders on the top of the fold, with Clinton talking about how we must reach out and teach our children that violence is not the answer. When the side column that went down also to a larger article below the fold was about how we were engaging in the war in Yugoslavia and the Czech republics and the bombs we're sending. Because violence doesn't solve anything, right? And that hit me in such a way that it made an impression that's remained 23 years later. And I think that, again, we're watching a society where we have a whole lot of lawmakers rushing to limit bodily autonomy, rushing to undo the gains of our society liberalizing human rights over the last 50 years, rushing to undo that under the guise of being moral, under the guise of upholding to acknowledge gun violence and guns as a cause of violence in our culture, while refusing to do anything about alienation or the actual rights of women. It really kind of goes without saying. And obviously, to them, the right to life ends at birth, because after that, you're really on your own, Jack. Find something to eat by yourself, because we can't fund school lunches that just breeds some sort of dependency on lunch. So that's what I have to say. It's all I would say that American society is conflicted at best.
All this talk of freedom and democracy from a society that will let a racist killer cop off with a slap on the hand so they can get a job in a nearby municipality, and at the same time, for the sake of torture, drown a man at Guantanamo Bay, a completely innocent man, 300 times, kill him 300 times. This isn't what is said is not what is done. And this is the society we live in.
And so, in my work in spirituality, I have been working with Tarot this week and have come up with a couple of readings that reflect that many of us are overwhelmed. Many of us are awash in a sea of emotions. And so where do we go with that? What do we do with that? It's important to allow yourself to feel. It's to allow yourself to feel. The cards I pulled for this week, specifically, let's just turn them all right side up so we can see them. It's the Ace of Wands, it's the Eight of Cups, and it's the Six of Pentacles. And together, I read them as, again, we're feeling a little overwhelmed. It's important because we have new ideas. We have things that need to be brought into creation. We are feeling a lot of creative flow and creative juice. And it's super important that we actually give ourselves time to develop it without sort of spinning out. That we take time to integrate the sorrow, we take time to integrate the news, and that we allow ourselves to feel before we actually act, or as a way of fueling creative acts, to pour that grief, that anger, that frustration into a creative act. The other part of this is remembering to take care of each other. That the Six of Pentacles talks about the flow of money, talks about somebody who may be experiencing good fortune. And it's important to understand that the best way to ensure the flow continues is to continue the flow, to make sure that you're paying it forward, that you're engaging in mutual aid. And that, of course, goes for if you're somebody who is really struggling, engage in mutual aid. Do what you can to support everyone around you, and everyone around you should be doing what they can to support you. It's the way we through hard times. So integrate. Remember to give yourself time and space to grieve. Remember to take care of your community. And new ideas, new creative passions are really trying to take hold, trying to push you in a new direction, perhaps, to create something from the ashes around us. So that's what I have. With that,
Well, I'd like to thank you for your comments. See, John says that anyone knows that no one is talking about trans men playing in men's sports.
yeah, actually, I was engaged in answering when suddenly I started talking again. Let me answer that verbally.
Okay.
Well, I think that one of the reasons for that is a lot of the transphobia is deeply, deeply wound around a deep misogyny, a hatred of women, a fear of women, and also a very profound homophobia, right? So I think that there is the conservatives are feeling actual horror at the idea that a so-called man may choose to be feminine, may choose to eschew the birthright of ultimate manliness. I think there's some genuine unease. And I think that what if they didn't know? What if, you know, they might need to control. I see the message, and we froze for a moment. I hope we're back. There's a knee-jerk response on the behalf of some of these lawmakers to absolutely control women's bodies, and that includes trans women, right? And to control trans women is to say you ain't gonna be a trans woman, that trans women somehow don't exist. So I think it's please do like our video, subscribe to our channel, share us around the internet. Let's go ahead and sign off for today, shall we?
All right.